so here we are, December's Journalist Month. And we're going to talk about William Frank Buckley, Jr., who was born on November 24th, 1925 in New York City. He was born to William Frank Buckley, Sr., who was an all-Irishman Catholic who had a Juris Doctorate and was an oil developer. And that's what, essentially, that career is what brought the young Buckley all over the world. His mother was Eloise Josephine Antonia Steiner of New Orleans. She was New Orleans royalty, descendant of Swiss and German origin, and her mother, of course, was an Irish girl. And they were fluent French speakers, and I think this is where he gets his flair, his mother. He was a sixth child of 10. And he was born in New York City, and they immediately moved to Mexico within about a year of his life. And his father, of course, was searching for oil. And his mother really enjoyed living there. Now, of course, a couple things that occurred in Mexico: the war, and they had to leave. There was a problem, though. The sitting U.S. president in 1928 wouldn't grant his father asylum because of the oil deals that he was making with the Mexican government. Found him to be a traitor. But anyways, they moved to Sharon, Connecticut, to his mother's side's farm, and then immediately go to Paris. Now, while he's in Paris, he attends a Catholic boarding school at the age of 6, which is his first year, and then immediately moves to London and attends an English day school. By the age of 7, he was a fluent speaker of Spanish and French, as well as what he's really well known for, the English language. And while he's in London, and this is, of course, a little bit from his memoirs and a little bit from a couple of biographies that were written about him. But by the age of 7, he was a really good harpsichord player. So he was big into music. And of course, sailing and horses and hunting and youth skiing and, of course, storytelling. And he started to write his first groupings of stories by the time he turned 8. Now, those, of course, are unpublished stories. Maybe Christopher, his son, at some point in time might be able to share that with us, but it hasn't yet. And at the age of 8, he started the H.S. Bach Society. So now we're recognizing he's not the average 8-year-old. So at the age of 13, this was just before World War II, he's entered into the Beaumont College in England, and it's a Catholic prep school. And this is where he really gets his first touch of close and personal friendship with Alistair Horn, who eventually becomes one of Great Britain's great historians. He's still with us. So, what happens? The war breaks out. The parents decide to move out of England, move back to the Americas, which is back to Mexico. He's homeschooled for a little bit using the Calvert school system curriculum. And then they move back to New York, and he starts to attend the Millbrook School, where his friend Alistair Horn is. And he graduates a class of 43. Immediately thereafter, he attends the National Autonomous University of Mexico for a year. And his interest is really the political machinations of Mexico. And then in 43, he is chosen as a officer candidate in the U.S. Army and becomes second lieutenant. The other thing about Millbrook is that he founds and becomes editor of the first yearbook collection, which is called Tamaric. And that particular yearbook is still going on at Millbrook today. So there's the first thing that he gives, that he's given. So he serves, and in 1945, he enters Yale. Becomes a member of Skull and Bones, a member of the Conservative Party movement, founds the Independent Party movement of Yale, becomes founding member of the Party of the Right, which is part of the Yale Political Union, still is today, and becomes chairman of the Yale Daily News. At this particular point in time, he is working very closely with the FBI, and he's tracking both right and left-leaning individuals who are at the school. He was very distrusting of the extremes. Very, very distrusting of the extremes. So let me talk a little bit about his siblings. His most famous sibling is his brother James, who was a former U.S. sitting senator from New York and current D.C. Court of Appeals. His sister Maureen Buckley O'Reilly is, of course, the mother of the great Bill O'Reilly, TV commentator. And his other sister, Patricia, is, of course, married to his classmate and best friend, L. Brent Bozell, who is the current, or had been the current editor of the National Review. So anyways, he graduates in 1950, and it's a fairly prestigious class at Yale in 1950. A lot of America's right and leftists graduated that year. But he meets and he marries Patricia Alden Austin Taylor. Her father was a Canadian industrialist, and the founder of the Canadian Socialist movement. And they meet. She's a student at Vassar College. So in 1951, what do Yale students do? They get recruited to the CIA. And his recruitment was a very interesting recruitment. He's recruited to the Special Actions Division. And who was their leader? Who was their boss? E. Howard Hunt. Of course, everybody knows who E. Howard Hunt is? Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me give you a couple quotes when he was writing at Yale, especially the, I forgot to mention this, in 1951 he wrote God and Man at Yale, which was his very first book. By the way, published by his sister's publishing company. These are the quotes. Well, he's being distorted by his Roman Catholic part. And this is a really bad view of man and religion. And that is the dean and trustee, Henry Sloane Coffin of Yale. And the other one is, it seems strange for a Roman Catholic to undertake and to speak for Yale's religious tradition. And of course, that's the dean of Harvard University, Mcgeorge Bundy. Everybody know who Mcgeorge Bundy is? Yeah, she's shaking her head. Okay, so in 1952, their only son is born, Christopher Taylor Buckley, who, of course, he was born on the 24th of December. And he, of course, is a great writer himself. He meets and becomes really big friends with Ed Raines, who was a Peruvian author, and he ends up transcribing Peruvian into English, and Ed Raines becomes a very famous author after that encounter. In 1953, he becomes an occasional panelist on 2 television shows, and these are precursors to his famed TV show Firing Line. And one of them is called Answer This, and that was on ABC. And the host, I'm losing it. I lost it. It's gone. Where is it? It's gone. Jesus Christ. David Brinkley. Thank you. And then, of course, the second show, found it. The second show on ABC, of course, was Answers for America, which was also hosted by David Brinkley as the moderator. And so he was an occasional panelist, and he really, really enjoyed this whole TV thing. And his quote is, "TV is going to be the spoken leader for American politics." And in 1954, he writes his second book, McCarthy and His Enemies, which is essentially the whole history of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Just to let you know, while he was an informant for the FBI, a lot of his work, which outed not just left-leaning individuals, but also right-leaning white supremacists that existed on campus. So, anyways, in 1955, what does he do? He becomes founding editor of the National Review, brings his brother-in-law on board, and also becomes very active at Hamilton College, looking for students, both at Hamilton and at Dartmouth, looking for students who could write and write proficiently with his style. Now, what the National Review did, and this was his outtake. He called it the boundaries of conservatism, and this is where we're not going to go. And we're going to denounce Ayn Rand. We're going to denounce Robert Walsh Jr., who, of course, is the founder of the John Birch Society. We're going to denounce George Wallace. We're going to denounce racism, anti-Semites, objectivists, and white supremacists. And he said, if the conservative movement doesn't wipe these people clean from their slate, the conservative movement will surely die. And so, in that same year, 1959, the Republican National Committee chooses him to be a vice chair. And that's what he does. he immediately chokes all of those extremist populations from the Republican Party as an act in his making boundaries, which helped get Eisenhower elected and a resurgence of republicanism in Congress. So in 1960, he formed the Young Americans for Freedom, or YAF, which essentially becomes the hand that helps him mobilize for Barry Goldwater in 1964. So in 61, he's a resident of New York City, and he finds the New York City Conservative Party, and personally funds the party. And he writes, of course, Up From Liberalism. In 1962, Universal Press takes him on to write a twice-a-week column called On the Right, which in 1962 was in 320 plus newspapers around the country, and eventually taken on in England as an interesting tidbit. And of course he writes The Committee and Its Critics, which is of course the commentary about the House Un-American Activities Committee. And in 1963, with the start of the Yaffers, he mobilizes support for Barry Goldwater, and writes Rumbles from the Right and the Left, and Dialogues with Americans. And that takes up all of his time from 1963 to 1964. So what does he do in 1965? John Lindsay is mayor of New York. Liberal Republican, class of 1950 Yale, and he's running a fairly decent city. A little dirty, a little corrupt, and he says, well, I'm going to run. And so what does he do? He takes his Conservative Party of New York City, and he runs for mayor. And his quote is, to remove Lindsay from office because we can. And he does. Now, granted, he comes in third place with 13.4% of the vote, and Lindsay loses by 14%. So his point is, there is a conservative movement anywhere. This is the city of New York. This is Manhattan. This is the Bronx. So even here, there's conservative ideas and ideals. So his platform was this. And I think it's a very liberal platform looking back. To enter what is called, there was a lot of congestion and automobile issues. So he said, how about a fee for entrance? Now, how many years is that? 1965. In 2005, Michael Bloomberg suggested the same thing. Yeah. He also opposed the Civilian Review Board. And he wanted a network of dedicated bike lanes. You know, that's American leftist propaganda right there. That beautiful, dedicated bike lanes, which of course New York doesn't see. So he said the way we could get my message out there is to do constant debates. And so John Lindsay says, yeah, all right, I'll do it. You know, he's an eloquent speaker. He looks good on television. And every time there came up, he'd answer the question and there was rebuttal time, this was his response. Oh, I'm satisfied to sit back and contemplate my own former eloquence. So, maybe a little much on himself. So anyways, in 1966, PBS comes to him and says, we really enjoyed your television presence. The public broadcasting system came to him and said, we really enjoy your public presence, your presence on TV. What do you think of putting together a show? And he said, the only way I'll do it is if you stay the hell out of it. And they said, okay. Well, no, they didn't say okay. They said, well, how about you have the opposing... He says, well, of course, being the president of my debate team at Yale, I always want to argue with other people. And so anyways, they let him do what he wanted to do. And that aired from 1966 to 1999. And that's called Firing Line. And I think that's where most people know, or how they know William F. Buckley, is from his famous moderate. So in 68, he's writing. In 66, he's writing for the for Universal Press, and he's writing his magazine and editing his magazine. And in 68, he writes The Jewels of the Eye. And NBC said, well, damn, you're good at this whole arguing thing. Let's get you to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968, and we're going to put you right next to the late, great Gore Vidal. And you two can hash out what you need to hash out, but there will be a moderator, and the moderator was Howard K. Smith, who, of course, is one of the founding moderators from Meet the Press. So anyways, there were a number of debates that were going on, and it was maybe their third day on screen. And on August 28th, 1966, the most famous TV action came on, and it was really over the police action against the protesters in Chicago. And Howard K. Smith asked a very simple question. If raising the Viet Cong flag is raising the Viet Cong flag the same as raising the Nazi flag? Now remember, we're going through the midst of the Vietnam War. They did raise the Viet Cong flag and on the streets of Chicago, and but is it the same as raising the Nazi flag during World War II? And Vidal's response was, people are free to state their politics as they feel fit. And Buckley's response was, well, not that people that all people are free to speak their view, but others are also free to ostracize them for holding these views. Now, I don't know, I find myself really thinking that that's kind of where I fall, is I think everybody should have that particular point of view and whatever it is that they have. But if it's a really bad point of view, they should be told that, hey, that's pretty damn stupid. Well, anyways, Vidal's response was, the only sort of pro or crypto-Nazi I can think of, Bill, is you. Which really pissed Bill off. And Smith said, now let's not do any name-calling here. So Buckley said, now listen, you queer. Stop calling me a crypto-Nazi, or I'll sock you in your goddamn mouth. And then you'll stay plastered. Because Vidal was known for, yes, his eloquent speaking, but he spent a lot of times in the bag. So this continued, and of course that was aired live, so you couldn't stop it. But they never got back. They were never put on stage ever again. So this debate continued through Esquire magazine. Esquire was, of course, a friend of both Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley, and it's called the Essay Duel. And Gore's was Buckley's was on experiencing Gore Vidal, and Vidal's was a distasteful encounter with William F. Buckley, and it fueled for an entire year. And finally, Gore said a number of really libelous things, which is essentially that Buckley tried to burn down the Protestant church in Sharon, Connecticut, which is false. So what does Buckley do? He sues Esquire, and he sues Gore for libel. Gore Vidal's people say to Gore, please, you're in the wrong. We don't need any more bad publicity. You're going down the wrong road. Settle. Gore never settles. But what does happen is Esquire settles, and Buckley stops. He stops pursuing. But during this period of time, he becomes TV foes, but very close friends with Norman Mailer, Allard Lowenstein, John Kenneth Galbraith, and George McGovern. Now, these are people that on screen, it was debate, debate, debate. I don't like you, and I don't like your ideas. But behind the closed doors, they were tight people and good friends. So in 1969, he writes The Odyssey of a Friend, which is Whitaker Chambers. I'm going to stop here. Maybe if Martha wants to come up and read. No? Okay. Well, I'm going to stop here.
Tijan, this dream